Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about something that might hit close to home for some of you guys. It's male baldness.
Yeah.
We're taking a deep dive into a study from the Journal of Health Psychology called Psychology's Medicalization of Male Baldness. And we're really going to try and figure out,
Interesting.
is this multi-billion-dollar industry really responding to like a legitimate need, or is there something else kind of going on here?
Yeah, that's a great question because, when you think about just how big this industry is,
Right.
by 2026, hair transplants alone, that market is expected to reach $12 billion.
A lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. So are we talking about helping people who are like really suffering, or are we talking about taking like a normal part of life and turning it into a medical issue?
Exactly. That's exactly what the study is looking at. They call this medicalization.
Okay.
And it's basically taking something that's just part of life and saying, oh, this is something that needs to be fixed.
Right.
This is something you need treatment for.
You need to go to a doctor for this.
Yes.
Interesting.
But the thing about male pattern baldness,
Right.
which is super common,
Yes.
it's not actually harmful
Right.
to your physical health.
It's not going to like shorten your lifespan or anything like that.
Yeah, it's not going to damage your organs.
Right.
But this industry,
Right.
they often present baldness as a really serious medical problem.
I see.
They use expensive treatments
Mm-hmm.
and they show you these before and after photos that are really dramatic
For sure.
to make it seem like you need to act now.
Right.
And that often hinges on this claim that baldness is going to cause you all this psychological distress.
So did they find any evidence to back that claim up?
Well, so they analyzed 37 research papers
Okay.
on the psychological impact of male baldness.
Okay.
And they found that 78% of those papers had what's called a commercial conflict of interest,
Okay.
meaning that they were funded by companies that sell baldness products,
Interesting.
or the authors themselves worked in the hair loss treatment industry.
Wow. So the people researching
Yeah.
whether or not baldness is a problem
Mm-hmm.
are the same people who benefit from it being a problem?
Exactly. And the study actually gives some examples.
Okay.
Like Merck, the company that makes Propecia and Rogaine,
Oh, wow.
they funded a lot of these studies, and then a lot of the papers were authored by dermatologists or hair transplant surgeons.
So people who are literally making money off of this.
Yeah, people who have a financial interest in you thinking that you need treatment.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so it definitely raises some questions about the research itself.
Right. Because if it's biased,
Yeah.
then you can't really trust it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So did these studies at least acknowledge that?
Mm.
Baldness is not actually a disease.
Sadly, very few did. Only 3 out of the 37 papers that they looked at
Wow.
actually explicitly said that baldness is not a medical condition.
Wow.
Most of them used medical terms,
Oh, really?
like disease disorder condition,
Interesting.
and they even referred to the men in the studies as patients, even when they weren't recruited from a medical setting.
So they're already setting the stage to make it sound like a medical problem,
Yeah, exactly.
even if it's not.
And that's a really important point because language can be so powerful.
Right.
When you use medical terms to describe something,
Right.
it makes it seem a lot more serious than it might actually be.
Right.
And that can make people more anxious, even about something as natural as hair loss.
Right. You start to think oh, maybe there is something wrong with me.
Exactly.
If they're calling it a disease and a disorder.
Yeah, and if all these doctors are studying it,
Yeah.
then it must be a big deal.
Right.
So,
Okay. So how do they choose who to include in these studies? Were they looking at a typical cross section of men, or was it?
so this is another area where things get a bit skewed. Okay. 68% of the studies focused on men who were already seeking treatment for their baldness.
I see.
So these were men who were already going to hair transplant clinics
Oh.
or signing up for trials for hair loss medications.
So they were already concerned about it. So
Exactly.
they're probably more likely to be distressed about it than the average guy.
Exactly. They were already invested in the idea that this is a problem that needs fixing.
Right.
So the study points out that this creates a really distorted view of baldness.
Yeah.
In reality, 75 to 95% of balding men
Wow.
haven't sought any treatment at all.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it paints a very different picture
Right.
when you look at the bigger picture.
Yeah. So if they're focusing on men who are seeking treatment,
Mm-hmm.
then what kind of solutions are they offering?
Right.
Did they ever, consider the option of just accepting baldness?
That's where the real focus of this research becomes clear.
Okay, what did they find?
96% of the studies that recommended any kind of action for dealing with baldness pointed towards commercial interventions.
Things that you can buy.
Yeah. Things like surgery, medications, and cosmetic products.
Well, it's like they're saying, the solution to this problem is to buy something.
Exactly.
Instead of, maybe learning to accept yourself or something.
Right.
Or
it's like you can buy your way out of baldness.
Yeah, right.
That's the message.
Yeah.
And this really plays into that medicalization narrative. It's like, baldness is a problem, and you need to fix it.
Right.
And the way to fix it is to buy these products and services.
Right. It's like if you don't spend money on it, you're not taking it seriously enough.
Yeah, exactly.
But remember, most men who are balding haven't even sought out treatment.
Right.
So it's like...
And even when they do, there's a lot more to consider than just the solutions that the industry is pushing.
Okay, so what else do we need to consider?
Well, a lot of these interventions, they're not always effective.
Right.
And they can sometimes have some pretty unwanted side effects.
Oh, yeah. We should talk about that. So let's dive into those details right after this. Quick break.
So before the break, we were talking about how these treatments, they aren't always effective.
Right.
And there are side effects.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to get caught up in the, the promise of these products.
Yeah.
And, maybe not looking at all of the details.
Absolutely.
And the risks involved.
And that's another key point that the study brought up, is that a lot of these research papers, they didn't really talk about the downsides of these interventions in a balanced way. They mentioned cost and effectiveness and side effects.
Right.
But it was very much focused on the potential benefits.
Right.
And very little attention was given to the potential risks.
Right. And some of these treatments can have really serious side effects.
Yeah. We touched on post-finasteride syndrome earlier.
Right.
And that can have really significant and lasting effects. And that's associated with finasteride, a drug that's often prescribed for hair loss.
Yeah. So remind me, what kind of effects are we talking about with this syndrome?
So it can involve a range of things.
Okay.
Including sexual problems, mental health changes, and even physical changes, like developing breast tissue.
That's
in men,
a lot to consider.
Yeah, that's a lot to consider.
Wow.
And even minoxidil, which is often seen as a safer option for treating hair loss, can cause things like scalp irritation, dizziness, changes in heart rate.
So it's not just like you take a pill and poof, you have hair.
No, not at all. There's a lot more to it
than that.
And then you also have to think about the psychological impact of constantly feeling like you have to treat your hair loss to be acceptable.
Right.
That can really take a toll on your self-esteem.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, and that's what the study argues, is that this medicalization narrative can actually create more distress than it relieves. Because it's framing baldness as a problem that needs to be fixed.
Right.
So the message is, you're not okay as you are.
Right. And then you internalize that, and then you feel bad about yourself, and then you're more likely to buy something to fix it.
Exactly. And the industry benefits from that insecurity.
It's disturbing when you think about it that way.
It is.
But how do we change it?
Right.
We've seen how these commercial interests are influencing research.
Yes.
But it seems like this goes beyond just marketing.
It does.
It's really impacting how we view baldness as a society.
And you've hit on a really critical point here.
Okay.
The study shows us that this medicalization narrative has actually crept into the scientific literature itself.
Right.
And that's where it becomes particularly concerning, because when research is biased, it loses its credibility, and it can't really inform sound decisions.
So how can we make sure that men are getting unbiased information about this so they can make a choice that's truly the best choice for them?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while this study doesn't give us all the answers, it does highlight some important steps that we can take.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me.
Okay.
So we've spent the last two parts kind of looking at how this research is often biased, and how that bias contributes to this whole idea of baldness as a medical problem, which can feel a little overwhelming. But I'm curious to hear what you think we can do about it.
Well, it's true. The study doesn't offer us like a simple solution.
Right.
But it does highlight some really important steps we can take.
Okay.
And the first one is just being aware of this medicalization narrative. Like we need to understand how it's constructed and how it's perpetuated.
Okay.
So we can start to challenge it.
So knowledge is power. But what does that actually look like in our everyday lives? Like, what can we do to actually change things?
Yeah. So on like an individual level, we can be more critical consumers of information.
Okay.
Like, don't just take those before and after photos or celebrity endorsements at face value.
Right.
Like, dig a little deeper.
Right.
Ask questions. And don't be afraid to consider all of your options, even the option of doing nothing.
That's a good point. Just because there's a treatment available doesn't mean you have to use it.
Exactly. It's about making an informed choice that feels right for you.
Right.
But it's also important to acknowledge that individual choice exists within a larger cultural context.
Okay.
We're constantly bombarded with messages about what's considered attractive and desirable.
For sure.
And those messages can be really powerful.
Like for men to have a full head of hair.
Yeah.
It's like
that's the key to youth and vitality. And that's where societal change comes in.
Okay.
We need to broaden our definition of beauty.
Okay.
And challenge these narrow standards that make men feel like they have to conform to a certain look.
I love that idea. So creating a world where baldness is just another variation of normal.
Exactly.
Not a flaw to be fixed.
Yeah.
But how do we actually shift those cultural norms?
Well, it starts with small everyday actions.
Okay.
You know, it could be as simple as challenging a stereotype in a conversation or complimenting a friend on their shaved head.
Okay.
We can also support organizations that are promoting body positivity and a wider range of beauty standards.
And what about the way we talk about it, even the language itself?
Yes, absolutely.
Seems like it contributes to the problem.
Instead of talking about treating baldness, maybe we should talk about managing it or simply living with it.
Right.
Those subtle shifts in language can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, it's about reframing the narrative. Shifting the focus from fixing a problem to embracing diversity.
Exactly. And that shift benefits everyone, not just men who are experiencing hair loss.
Right.
It helps us create a more inclusive and compassionate society where everyone feels comfortable in their own skin, regardless of how much hair they have.
That's a great point. So it's not just about appearances. It's about creating a world where everyone feels valued.
Yes.
And accepted for who they are.
Exactly. I love it. And by challenging the medicalization of baldness, we're also advocating for a more holistic approach to healthcare in general.
Right.
One that respects individual choice and doesn't exploit girls' insecurities for profit.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to take this information and really think about it. Challenge the narratives that you encounter.
Yes.
Spread awareness.
Yeah.
And be kind to yourself and others. Remember, baldness is not a disease. It's just one way of being.
Exactly.
And that's perfectly okay.
There's beauty in diversity, and that includes diversity of hair. Embrace it, celebrate it, and let's work together to create a world where everyone feels empowered to be their authentic selves.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking, and maybe even a little liberating.
Yes.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.